Okay, we're back on a 22-foot Continental. Yesterday I steam bent the chines in place, and today I'm going to make a video on how I set the keel into place. If you notice, all these frames are in, and as I built them, I did not cut in the keel landing as I went, but what I did do is, before I removed the original frame, I got a mark from the ground to the keel landing, and as I put the frames back in, I put the mark back on there, so I know basically where the keel goes. And now that all the frames are in, and here's the keel on the bench, this keel is in good shape. I took and scraped it and cleaned it up today. There's still, I removed a bunch of fasteners out of the Rabbit. There's a bunch of broke fasteners along there, but I removed all those, and I'm going to end up plugging all those screw holes with dowel rod and glue. But I cleaned it up, and I'm going to get ready to set this basically into place. But I'm going to show you a technique that I came up with on how I set that. The first boat I ever put a bottom on, and I redid all the frames, I cut all the landings in as I went. And it was kind of a mess. They were all over the place, and I had to end up shimming them and everything. And I figured the next boat I did, I'm just going to cut all the landings at once and sink the keel into it. So that's what I ended up doing, and I'm going to show you a technique that I use. I cut, first of all, I have all those marks on every bottom frame showing roughly where the keel goes. So what I do is, I've got a bunch of 1/4-inch plywood blocks here that are all cut to the same width. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to lay those on each frame right at my mark there, and I'm going to level it. First of all, the boat has to be level. I level the boat before I put the frames in. So you put these blocks up here, and you put them right at your mark. And I'll take a little torpedo level, and I'll level it up, and then I'll put a couple of brads in there. And I'll get them all on, and then I'll put a straight edge, and then I'll put some, like a rule here, an aluminum flexible rule, and I'll basically sight down it and make sure that everything looks good. So what I'll do is, I'll stop the camera, I'll put all of those blocks into place, and then I'll see how close we are, and I'll start it from there. Okay, now I have all my plywood spacers in place, and again, these spacers are to help me to determine where to cut the bottom frames, where to cut the landings for the keel, to place the keel. If I just trusted my marks that I made as I built the frames, where the old keel was, if I cut all those at once without figuring out if they were good or not, chances are the keel would be up and down, and I'd have to shim it in some places and take out material in other places. So before I make those cuts, I went ahead and took these plywood blocks, which are all 2 inches wide, and what I did was I put them on my mark, took the torpedo level, leveled them up, and then shot a few brads in them. And I did that to, I think, 16 frames. And then what I did was I put a straight edge on there on the aft section, and I took a flexible aluminum rule, and put it on the mid and forward sections. In this boat, you've got to know how the keel looked originally. And when I took the bottom off, when the keel was still on and the frames were on, I determined where the flat or planing surface was. This is considered a planing hull, and the planing surface is the back, like, quarter of the boat. So they're a little bit different on every boat. So before I took the keel and the bottom frames out, I laid a straight edge on next to the keel to figure out where that planing surface was, and it was from the transom up to the 4th frame. When I put the straight edge on there, all those lined up real nice, and they hit. All the bottom frames hit. And then from like the 4th frame forward, it was just a nice continuous arc, and it looked real good when the keel was on there. So I wrote some notes down when I took the bottom off, that the planing surface the straight section was basically from the transom up to the fourth frame. So now that I have my blocks on here, I've got to make that straight basically. And I've already adjusted these spacers, but when I first put the straight edge up here, like the second and third frame it hit, but the bottom it wasn't hitting. It was this spacer was a little bit low, and on the fourth frame it was a little bit low. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to basically make this line look sweet from the back all the way up forward, because these blocks, it's basically just a 2-inch offset from where the keel landing is. So if you can get this to look good, if you can get all these blocks adjusted to look good, then that's going to translate into the keel fitting the same way. So I always start at the back, and I adjusted these four a little bit down and a little bit up until I got the straight edge hitting all of these spacers. And then I know from the fourth frame forward, it's going to be just a steady arc. So, and I had to adjust almost all of these really. Now I'm only talking about maybe a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch the most up or down to get all of these to hit real nice. You know, some of them, the rule was a little bit high on it, so it had to be adjusted up. And other ones, you could tell that maybe my spacer was a little bit high and the arc didn't look good. So I do really all of this by eye. The back end, of course, is straight, so you could tell if everything's hitting. And I don't know if the camera can pick this up, but then I just take and adjust each one until the ruler on here is just a nice arc, and I take it and I move it one section at a time until everything looks good. And that's what I did. I adjusted all of these after I set them. So basically now the back section, the planing section or planing surface is nice and straight, and then all the landings forward are nice and has a nice arc to it. So now basically this tells me where to cut it. So what I do, I've got one extra spacer here that's the same as all the other ones. What I do is I put this up here. Let's see, on the spacers that are already on here, since I already have 2 or 3 pencil lines and everything, what I do, if that's where the spacer is, I'll take a piece of tape, blue tape, and that way I could see it, and I'll put that blue tape right under there, and then I'll put a block, this 2-inch block on the other side, and I just hit my ruler, and then I draw a pencil line and put tape there. So when I'm done, I'll have a tape line on the aft and forward section of every frame, so I'll know where to cut. I'll know where to cut down to. And then once I do that, I set the original keel right on here, and that's how I get the width, and I'll show you how I do that. So I'll stop the camera, and I'll put tape, and I'll mark on every spacer. I'll put the tape under there, forward and aft, and then I'll start the camera back up, show you, and I'll put the keel back on there. All right? Okay, here's one more quick shot before I take all these spacer blocks off. I went through and I put some blue tape right underneath each spacer block on the frames, and I also did the other side of the block. And what I did was I just laid the straight edge and my flexible scale here on the spacer blocks, and I've got I have one extra block that's 2 inches wide, and I got some double side tape on there, and I just put it on the opposite side of the frame, flushed it up to the top or the bottom of the ruler, and stuck it on there, and then I put my tape on there. So now at every frame I have a place to cut down to set the keel. And one thing I didn't mention the last time was when I was adjusting all these spacers to make this line sweet, all I did, these were just brad nailed on, these spacers, so I just popped them off and adjust them up or down accordingly. So now the next thing I'll do is I'll pop all these off, take the brads out, and you'll see then I have a line. I'll have something to go down to. And then I'll stop the camera. In the next video you'll see is the keel actually on top of here. And what I'll do is I'll center it, and then I'll have a line on either side of that keel to mark. So then I have the bottom of the landing, and then I'll have the side. So then all I have to do is cut down to this line on both sides and then take that material out. And I'll show you how to do that next.